Hello, everybody. Coming back at you here with a surprise live stream. I know it's been a while. It's been, what, 2 weeks now since I've last live streamed, and like a month since I've made my last video. Sorry if I sound like shit right now. I'm a little under the weather at the moment, but I think it's kind of a blessing. I'm not going to lie. I'm actually kind of glad that I'm sick right now, but we will get to that in a moment. Before we can talk about SARS-CoV-19, we need to talk about my job momentarily. So I work for FedEx. Thousands upon thousands of packages pass through my hands on a daily basis. And yeah, like I said, thousands upon thousands of packages. And these packages pass through dozens, hundreds of hands on a daily basis. So you got to think that's a lot of hands. They don't supply us with gloves. So, and I see a lot of people that don't take COVID seriously at my job. Like, yeah, there's a mandate that everybody wears masks, but there's no mandate that everyone wears gloves. And the people that do wear masks usually wear it under their nose. They wear it on their chin. They don't even wear their masks properly. I am one of the people who actually wears my mask properly. And I usually wear gloves when I'm at work because my hands get cold. So despite this, and despite the fact that I have been taking all necessary procedures to not get sick, well, look what happened. What are you going to do? The only reason I'm doing better now than I was earlier, I think, is because I microdosed, or not micro, wrong word. I didn't microdose. I don't want to. Wrong terminology, my friends. I'm talking about vitamin C. I took 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C, and I'm feeling a lot better than I was earlier. I woke up this morning, more like this afternoon. I woke up at around 2 o'clock. I was feeling a lot of nausea, headaches, loss of olfactory, loss of taste, loss of a bunch of usual things that I have. I was just feeling really shitty when I woke up, and my girlfriend, she was bitching me out because she said, "Oh, you're not staying clean. You're not taking this COVID shit seriously," But I always try to explain to her, it's like a health risk every time I go to work and go to the job that I do, because I'm working around people all day and I'm holding packages, exchanging packages all day. It's just kind of a occupational hazard. I mean, it is what it is. But I'm managing. I'm doing a lot better right now. My throat's just a little sore, and but yeah, I just wanted to get in touch with you guys, see how y'all are doing. I meant to go get tested for COVID today, because I am experiencing a lot of the symptoms. Unfortunately, all the urgent cares in my area, I hit up a couple different urgent cares and they're all booked. So I've got to go in tomorrow morning. I got to stay up past my bedtime, kind of sleep deprive myself, and go into urgent care to get a confirmation and see if I indeed have the coronavirus. So with that being said, there is a dual nature in all things, comrades. And the dual nature is, on one hand, yeah, I feel like shit. Like, I feel like absolute hell right now. I only feel better because of the immuno boost from the vitamin C. But on the other hand, I'm going into self-imposed quarantine. So that means I'm not going to be at work for 70 hours this week like I usually am. I'm usually there like 60 to 70 hours a week. So I actually have some freed up time on the table. So what does this mean? It means that I have time to actually work on YouTube videos and actually make content. The only reason I've been leaning on live streams as much as I have been recently is because I simply haven't had the time to work on stuff, or when I get home, I don't feel like doing anything. But now that I have all this time freed up before Christmas, I might not be working for the rest of the year. So there's an open window of opportunity to make new YouTube videos. So if you guys got any suggestions, leave it in the chat, and yeah, we're golden. But this wouldn't be a very interesting live stream if I left it there, now would it? So I took the liberty of looking up some news articles, looking up a couple different things that I think you guys might find interesting. So today is going to be a Corona stream. and we're going to talk about current events, starting with the Rona. But first, let us review some comments. Oh, oranges. Oh, fuck yeah. No, I took a vitamin C tablet. It was about 1,000 milligrams, which is like an order of magnitude beyond my daily value. Eat rice with a what? I don't even understand what that is. Rice with a wrench? Why would I eat a wrench? Is it wrong to order packages? No, dude. It's just an occupational hazard. Honestly, the responsibility kind of lies on global capital and these foreign corporations, or not foreign, but all these corporations really just for doing a token gesture about COVID-19. Like, we had a golden opportunity to do a proper lockdown at the beginning of this year, but instead the Trump administration decided to ignore it because they wanted to keep the stock market going. And lo and behold, because they ignored it and acted like it was nothing, it ended up spreading. And now it's a little bit too little too late. Even if we did a proper lockdown now, it would have to be very severe. But this is like the trade-off. Like, human life, human bodies are the coal that fuel this economy at this point. Because, so when you look at this right here, when you look at the fact that we have, look at that, 280,000 new cases, deaths. Let's look at the deaths. Yeah, and now these are rising. We hit a record number of deaths the other day. So, not for Ohio. Let's just look at, so yeah, these people right here, 308,000 people. These are the tributes that have been sacrificed upon the altar of profit, my friends. These are the people that the Mr. Free Market had to just have, arbitrarily get sick and die because, we can't do a proper lockdown. We got to keep the economy going. And this isn't even the communist in me talking. This is more like my social democratic roots talking here, because there are countries, social democracies, and, be it like the Nordic model of Europe or the red social democrats in China that have done proper lockdowns, and they are doing phenomenally. Like, it doesn't take a genius or a rocket scientist to understand that you need to do a proper lockdown. You need to have some redistributive wealth policies. You actually just need to have a game plan. But because America is such an unhinged country, because the individualistic nature of this country, because of the ease of transportation and a litany of other factors, I mean, this country is extremely vulnerable to pandemic. We may be number one in military, but we're also number one in cases and deaths. And I have a feeling, like what with me and Jason were talking about some time ago, that COVID-19 is just going to be a perpetual issue in America. It's just going to be something that's here. It's going to be an endemic, which is all I'm trying to say. Now, like I said, I'm not 100% certain that I personally have COVID, but I'm pretty sure I do because I'm experiencing a lot of the symptoms. Now, I'll know for certain tomorrow morning when I'm tested. Well, I'll know a week from tomorrow morning anyways, because apparently it takes like a week for your test to come back. So, yeah, that's my Corona doomsday, Corona endemic plug there. Here's something else that I do have to say. So apparently there's apparently there is a vaccine in the works. Yeah, a vaccine in the works. Let's look at that. COVID-19 vaccine. I believe the FDA panel endorses Moderna's coronavirus vaccine. I believe that's what it is. Here we go. Let's go ahead and check out this New York Times article. But first, let's pull that up. Pull that up, Jamie. Let's do this. Okay. An advisory group's recommendation will mean millions more Americans can be inoculated, extending protection against COVID beyond big urban areas into urban and suburban areas. So I've heard records of the vaccine being 90% effective, and I think it was AbbVie or AstraZeneca, but or the Moderna vaccine, but one of them was 90% effective. Well, here's my issue. vaccines take years upon years to develop. You don't just develop an effective vaccine for a virus in like 10 months. It usually takes like 5 to 6 years to develop an effective vaccine that isn't gonna, get people sick and killed. So that's why I'm very sketchy about this vaccine business, and why I probably won't be taking it personally. I'm going to be given it another year or two before I consider taking a vaccine. But man, my nose is leaking shit. Anyways, as the nation buckled from uncontrolled spread of the disease, with 3,600 deaths on Wednesday setting yet another horrific record, a panel of independent experts recommend, by a vote of 20 in favor and 1 abstention, that the FDA authorize the Moderna vaccine for emergency use. The formal decision, expected on Friday, would clear the way for some 5.9 million doses to be shipped around the country starting this weekend. Moderna would be the second company allowed to begin inoculating the public, giving millions more Americans access to desperately needed vaccine. But first, made by Pfizer and its German partner BioNTech, received authorization last week. Yeah, no, this is not good. We should not be rushing a vaccine like this out to the public, because if we do, and it's not a good vaccine, this shit could kill a lot more people than it saves. A modern vaccine can be distributed more widely because it can be stored at normal freezer temperatures and yada, yada, yada. Moderna can go more places, Dr. Candy Cohen, North Carolina's Secretary of Health and Human Services, said this week. We can be in all 100 counties with some amount of vaccine, some allocations at first, by the end of next week, assuming Moderna gets approved this week. The 2 vaccines and an ambitious rollout by the federal government, states, and business to deploy them are first signs of hope to end a pandemic that has killed more than 300,000 Americans, closed schools and businesses, and left people afraid to go near friends, neighbors, and relatives. Yeah, so I don't know. I am very pessimistic. I got to see it to believe it. I don't think this vaccine is going to provide good protection against the coronavirus, mainly because, it's already mutated. There's already several strains out there, so they would have to come up with vaccines for those strains as well. And it's just going to keep mutating year by year. And it's going to be a while before they have effective vaccines around that can really inoculate people against the virus. So I don't really see this. I don't really see this stopping the spread of the virus. At best, it'll curtail it. My prediction, or I don't want to predict the future, but I'm willing to bet you're going to see commercials that go along the lines of, do you have a family member that has taken the, the Moderna vaccine, and they have either gotten sick, have burning, foaming at the mouth, or are currently not living anymore? Well, did you know you can collect a settlement from Moderna for damages? All you got to do is dial so-and-so, and you're going to have a lot of people that are going to be filing lawsuits because of that. Tell you what, guys, you better call Saul when your family members are getting this vaccine and it turns out to be totally impotent, or it gets them really sick or killed. You guys better call Saul, because you're going to be taking on Moderna, which has teams of lawyers for this shit. I can't wait to see the controversy. But anyways, moving on. So let's see some comments here. I'll be honest, they're in a rush to get this out because they don't want to lock down the economy. They don't care if they use this as guinea. True, yeah. Honestly, it's what they're trying to do. They can't do a proper lockdown, so they're just trying to rush a vaccine, Look at me. I'm a fucking casualty of the fact that they won't lock down and give people emergency UBI. It's kind of like the fucked up part, though, is that if I call off, as I'm calling off for this week, if I don't test positive for the coronavirus, my job is not going to compensate me for the days that I've been gone. Isn't that kind of messed up? So there's sort of this really sick incentive, or punishment for people not to come in. Like, so like you could end up in a situation where they're sick, but because they're afraid they won't get paid for taking time off to get tested for the vaccine and self-quarantine, they don't do it. So you have people sick with the virus coming into work and, getting their dirty ass hands all over packages, and people are going to rub their nose, they're going to rub their eyes, and they're going to get sick. And lo and behold, before you know it, third the staff members at FedEx Ground are sick with SARS-CoV-19. Beautiful. Anyways. Good shit. Moderna, the Yankee exterminator. How are employers going to make their employees take it? That is an excellent question. I'm guessing they're going to try to pay people to take it, or they're going to offer some sort of tax incentive of some kind. They're going to find a way to use the carrot to get people to take it. But if a bunch of people are rejecting the vaccine, then they're probably just going to whip out the stick and probably threaten to fire people like, oh, if you don't take the vaccine, you'll lose your job. So the issue... I totally lost track of what I was going to say. Isn't it funny how they say China is fudging their COVID numbers, yet they're literally giving us incentive to not test for the COVID here? Oh yeah, I know. Like what I showed earlier, the confirmed cases per day is not the actual count of people who are infected with the coronavirus. So there are a lot of people that get infected with it that don't get tested. So I'm willing to bet I can't really say, like, I can't really give like a good estimation, because that's like trying to predict how many stars there are in the universe, of how many people are not going in and getting tested because they're afraid of not getting paid or taking time off work, to go into self-imposed quarantine. I mean, I'm at a point to where I don't really give a shit whether or not I get paid. I've been getting really burned out on the overtime, and I've got quite a bit of money in my account. Like, my soul does not like, but my pocketbook loves the overtime. Anyways. If you're poor and you're disabled and you're a worker, you're even more fucked in this pandemic than you normally would be. Nobody talks about how disabled workers are putting their lives on the line. Nobody's talking about how all these service workers, really, the Kroger boost in pay should have never ended, and the COVID-19 boost in pay at my job should have never really ended. Like, really, people are putting their lives and their health on the line to keep, so that people can continue to order stupid bullshit in mass from Amazon and from grocery stores. Americans literally cannot conceive of the idea of just going like 2 weeks without consuming anything. Just 2 weeks where you don't buy anything and you just sit down and you chill. It's really impossible for Americans to imagine such a situation. Isn't that crazy? But anyways, of course you would. Cuba is a civilized nation. Anyways, let's go ahead and move on. Moving on. Comfy Corona stream here. $8 million plunged into poverty since U.S. coronavirus aid ended. Oof. God damn. That's rough. The cutoff of federal supplemental unemployment benefits in July has driven 8 million Americans into poverty in the ensuing 5 months, according to a study published Wednesday by the University of Chicago and the University of Notre Dame. The increase of 2.4 percentage points in the poverty rate in the space of only 5 months is the fastest increase since the U.S. government began collecting figures on poverty in 1960. It is twice the size of the most previous increase during the 1979-1980 oil crisis. We got an anti-masker here. Bitch McConnell. The increase in poverty is greater for African Americans. Of course it is, dude. 3.1 percentage points, and for those with only high school education or less. The biggest increase in poverty were found in those states with the most primitive unemployment compensation systems, such as Florida. Ah, yes, dick deep in the Bible Belt, in the red states, of course. Even these figures grossly understate the colossal impact of the coronavirus pandemic on working class living standards. The official U.S. poverty line stands at $26,000 for a family of four, an income that would leave such a family homeless or near starvation in most major U.S. metropolitan areas. Oh yeah, no, 26K per year is dog shit pay. Like, I know that, and this is something that I do want to get to, is I want to talk a little bit about third worldism here in a minute, but yeah, it is true that Americans make exponentially more, but that's in the face of exponentially greater inflation as well. Like, the cost of living is insane. Like, when you consider like how much you need for health insurance and car insurance and all these other private, all these things that should just be like, given to you as being a productive member of civilization, are instead private services that you get charged out the ass in this fucking racketeering scheme in order to have access to. Like, it's absolutely insane, like how much Americans get squeezed for this stuff, especially healthcare. We're fucked on healthcare. Like, the fact that we have all these people dying of COVID and getting sick from COVID should be a massive testimony for the dire need for a national healthcare plan in this country. But anyways, enough of my spiel. The study confirms that driving workers and their families into poverty is the deliberate policy of the U.S. government and the two corporate-controlled political parties. The bipartisan CARES Act, adopted in March, led to a significant decline in poverty during the first 3 months of the pandemic. The $600 a week federal supplemental benefits and other subsidiaries, such as the one-time $1,200 per person check from the Treasury, were more than many workers had received in low-paying jobs, which they lost because of the coronavirus pandemic. Oh yeah, the $600 a week in unemployment. I know all about that, dude. I remember applying for unemployment when I first got fired from my job at the beginning of this year when I was working in utilities, and it was great. In order for me to get those unemployment checks while I was, furloughed from my job or let go, they all had all sorts of requirements. Oh, you have to prove that you've applied for 3 different jobs here. You've got to show pictures of you shaking hands with the person you're getting an interview with. You have to jump through several hoops of fire and juggle a dozen pineapples, and you have to do it on camera. You have to journey out to the Amazon rainforest and find rare endangered flowers and bring it back. What I'm trying to say here is they make it an absolute pain in the ass just for you to get $600 a week, which is not really that much. I mean, it's something if you're on Walmart worker or Kroger worker poverty wages. But anyways, once the back to work drive began in May, employers began to complain that workers would not go back to their jobs, mainly out of fear of contracting coronavirus, but in part because they would actually lose money. Senate Republicans and the Trump administration blocked any extension of the federal benefit this past July 1st deadline, which they had agreed on with the Democrats. And yeah, that's right, proles. Get back to work. Get back to work, motherfuckers. We're not going to pay you to sit at home in quarantine. Get back to work. We got to keep the economy going. U.S. state paid unemployment insurance is among the worst. Excuse me right here. U.S. state paid unemployment insurance is among the worst of any industrialized country and expires after 6 months in most states, and sooner in some. In many European countries, by contrast, unemployment benefits can last for as long as 2 years and pay 80% of lost wages, while the U.S. jobless benefits average only 20%. The workers reduced to benefits as low as $100 per week. The poverty rate accordingly began to increase significantly. As the study details, poverty rose by around 2.4 percentage points from 9.3% in June to 11.7% in November, and adding 7.8 million to the ranks of the poor. So basically, almost 8 million people fell below the poverty line over the course of this year. And it, like, right after they sliced the benefits from the CARES Act, the unbridgeable class divisions which have been laid bare during COVID-19 pandemic are documented in another study made public Wednesday. The Washington Post analyzed financial reports of the 50 largest U.S. companies and found that while 45 were profitable during the pandemic, 27 nonetheless carried out layoffs, cutting into a combined total of 100,000 workers. At the same time, they delivered 240 billion shareholders through buybacks and dividends between April and September. Okay, so even though they were profitable, they still carried out layoffs because, make more money. Because when you're in a crisis of realization, one of the easiest ways to restore profitability is to just lay off and fire a bunch of workers. I mean, that's the fastest way to restore the rate of profit, or it's one of several counteracting tendencies. I mean, really, 2008 was the Long Depression. I mean, the Long Depression of 2008 never technically came to an end. This is just another one that's mounting on top of it. And then we've got another one coming in the mid-2020s. I mean, it's just going to be a nice, slow downward glide, circling the drain, so to speak, in the words of the famous late, great George Carlin. One of those shareholders, of course, was Jeff Bezos, CEO of Amazon, owner of the Washington Post. Oh, yeah, he made 80. Well, oh, wait. So he made 80 billion, not 40 billion. Ah, shit. And the big businesses, like the biggest corporations of the country, are really benefiting because they're squeezing out all the small businesses. I believe the terminology is rats among elephants, or mice among elephants. The elephants being the giant corporations and the dancing rats being all the small businesses that just keep getting stomped out. This social catastrophe is set to worsen immediately. 12 million more workers face financial cutoff of all benefits on December 26th, the day after Christmas, barely a week from now, when specific pandemic-related unemployment relief expires for gig and other self-employed workers who are not eligible for state-paid unemployment compensation. Many of these are among 5 million renters for whom a moratorium evictions will expire December 31st. Oof. America is heading towards a winter of homelessness, hunger, sickness, and mass death without any parallel in this country's history, with not the slightest hint of serious action to forestall it from either the Trump or the Democratic Party replacement under Biden. Oh yeah, no, they're already talking about rolling out austerity measures. Already talking about it under Biden, like, oh yeah, no, we gotta tighten our belts, we gotta do some cutting. And, Biden's already said he's willing to make deals with the Republicans. And, I mean, it is what it is. This is it, guys. This is the anti-racist or the lesser of two evils here. Joe Biden, the Mr. Is less racist than Trump, even though he has done more to fuck over black and brown people in the last 47 years than Donald Trump has in the last 47 months. Here we go. The lesser evilism right here. This is the consequence of the unfurring willingness to cuck to the Democrats at all times. Anyways, the two capitalist parties are wrangling over stimulus legislation that is barely even a fig leaf to disguise their indifference in the coming calamities. The latest version of the bill, outlined Wednesday morning, would provide extended benefits for only $300 a week for smaller number of unemployed workers, plus a one-time check of $600. Okay, so basically, the next round of stimulus is going to be a paltry $600 and only $300 a week rollout benefits. So both amounts are half those provided by the CARES Act, although the need is greater. So I don't know. Does this shit, just wondering with you guys, does this shit seem to you like a bribe? Like, the only reason they're really doing this or even talking about stimulus in the first place is because they know the alternative is people rioting and protesting in the streets. And with that being considered, do you really think that $600 per person as well as $300 per week in unemployment benefits is fundamentally going to be enough to keep people from engaging in protesting and rioting on the scale of which what was seen during the height of the George Floyd protests back in May, June, July. So I don't know. I'm not really certain. I don't really know what's going to come next, but it's going to be a tough winter for a lot of people. It's going to be a tough winter for me. I'm not going to lie. It's been nice being able to get caught up on bills, but working all this overtime is very soul crushing. Of course, enough about my fucking self. I believe there is protests in Portland again. Actually, let's talk about that. Evictions protests. Here we go. This is something that you won't see the mainstream media talking about. Roadside blockade taken down at Red House eviction. Oh, here we go. Family whose eviction sparked protests owned second home report. Let's check this out. Oh yeah, new stimulus check by Christmas. Yeah, I would say so. That's probably what it's going to be. It's going to be a paltry buy-off, just enough to keep people from rebelling. The cyber, I mean, kinda, yeah. I mean, it's not going to be nearly as cool. You're not going to have people walking around with like augmented limbs and cybernetic implants. It's not going to be that cool. I mean, but it is going to be a dystopic hellscape nightmare where people are renting out their cars and their closets and their foreheads to other people, doing this gig economy type work. And everyone's going to just be receiving dividends, and you're just going to have massive reserves of people that don't produce anything. I mean, it could go that way. It could also go the direction that they just genocide everybody off. I mean, that's also a possibility. But as I was saying, let's check this out. Come on. A suspected bra thief was forced to pose with his lusty loot. That is an interesting story, but I don't care. The Oregon family whose eviction sparked Portland-armed autonomous zone protest also owned another house nearby and had raised $30,000 more than they needed to buy back one that they lost. So this is a good sign. We have people that are keeping that are trying to fight to keep their neighbors from getting evicted. The Kinney family, who lost the so-called Red House on Mississippi after defaulting on a second mortgage to pay legal fees in a criminal case, have since 1966 also owned a second home less than 2 miles away. One of the owner's sons, Michael Kinney, answered the door a second time and confirmed to a reporter for OPB that it was owned by his family, but refused to answer more questions, the station said. So yeah, protesters regroup around the Red House on Mississippi Street in Portland. We've already offered to sell back the property at a cost because, of course, we've paid taxes, legal fees, bank fees, etc. He offered it for the $260,000 he paid in auction, plus $20,000 he had paid since buying it in 2018, significantly less than more than $308,500 raised in a GoFundMe this Sunday. The Ukrainian immigrant even involved Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler to try and help him negotiate with the Kinneys. Still to no success, he told local media. Instead, he said he had been left with fear of threats over his ownership of the house that has become the latest flashpoint in violence rocketed city. I myself am a father of little kids, he told the Oregonian. I'm concerned for our safety the most. Interesting. Here's some pictures of people. So yeah, no, apparently an autonomous zone was set up here as well. Portland protesters fighting gentrified takeover streets. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. So they set up an autonomous zone over the anti-eviction protests. That's pretty interesting. Yeah, no, I think Portland is a pretty class-conscious city. There's a lot of protesting. There's always something going on in Portland. I mean, the anti-fascist protests back in 2019, the BLM protests. There's these anti-eviction protests, and I'm willing to bet that we're going to see a huge surge and flare-up of anti-evictions protests over the course of next year. I just think it's going to happen, and I definitely think it's going to lead to some radicalization and an increase in class consciousness. But unfortunately, there isn't really like a single unified monolith of left wingers. I mean, all we have are these different coalitions and vanguard parties and organizations, but which is good because they're the kernels and they're the seeds of class consciousness. And it's also good that we're seeing more of these communes, more of these autonomous zones. I'm hoping that we can start seeing more and watching them spread, and people can establish more mutual aid to help out their communities and their neighbors. It's definitely good to see this stuff, comrades. It's definitely a good sign, and it's something that we should be happy to see. So yeah, critical support for the autonomous zone, critical support for Chaz. You know it. But man, I wish cool stuff like this happened around where I live. Class consciousness is dead in the city that I live at. It's not dead in my warehouse though. Where I work, it's something that you see. There's like a I believe an age gap or an age divide between older and younger people. Like when you talk to a lot of younger people, at least in the warehouse I work, a lot of them are very receptive to like socialist rhetoric and are pretty much down with it. When you actually describe what it is, it's really older people. So I think a lot of it has to do with the brainwashing of the Red Scare. Like a lot of these old boomers grew up during the Red Scare, or even the Gen Xers, people that are in their 40s, they grew up during the Red Scare, the neoliberal era. They grew up during a time when all this stuff was stigmatized. But as a result, we have all these younger people who grew up during the era of Occupy Wall Street in the Bernie Sanders campaign. I mean, and I definitely think it's going to go somewhere down the line. But for now, the left is very decentralized, disorganized, and I do not think this is a strength. I definitely think this is a weakness that needs to be addressed down the line. But enough of my ramblings. The tankies were right all along. Imagine my shock. Now left Kurds are being attacked by other Kurds. The tankies are correct once again in the Middle East analysis. The Middle East has been a shit show for a very long time. It's been a shit show now. It's been a shit show after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Hell, why do you think Christopher Columbus sailed out west? It was to find a trade route to the east around the Middle East. All right, and it's an unfortunate tragedy because it's an area that's been held back by a lot of religious fundamentalism, a lot of imperialism, colonialism, and so on. I mean, Middle East is just a hot spot for a reaction as a result of a litany of historical factors, and they would be trending in a much better direction if a certain union of socialist republics didn't collapse. And on that note, let's talk about the collapse of the USSR. Let's talk about the fall of the Soviet Union, because I actually found some interesting articles talking about one of the main factors why that happened. In fact, fun fact, the Soviet Union never collapsed. It was actually dismantled and overthrown by a sect of political elites that saw it in their interest to overthrow it in order to enrich themselves. A lot of those oligarchs, that what we know as oligarchs today in Russia, were actually the benefactors of the collapse of the USSR. They were having the time of their life in the 90s. They were having the time of their life in the 1990s, accumulating that capital, buying out all those state assets, privatizing everything, inviting foreign corporations over to cannibalize the Eastern Bloc and Russia. You know, they got rich off of the collapse. And that's the reason why Eastern Europe and modern day Russia are, for the most part, wastelands to this day. But anyways, the anti-eviction protest was less autonomous and more, we're going to defend this like a castle. Also, just join your Discord. Oh, welcome to the Discord, comrade. Yes, the Pizza Man. Contrary to popular belief, the Pizza Man was not entirely, it didn't all rest on his shoulders. Pizza Man was just a useful idiot, but really it was like ghouls like Yeltsin who were the ones that were truly responsible for the collapse. But anyways, there's one reason in particular why the Soviet Union stagnated and why it ran into a lot of economic troubles in the 1980s. And the reason being is because they ceased to decrease the work week. By reducing work hours, you know, fighting for a 7-hour workday, 6-hour workday, it would have pressured a lot of the enterprises to innovate in order to cover for the deficit made in the loss of labor time and the loss of workers. So a push towards automation, a political push towards automation, it would have been absolutely tantamount. And with that drive towards automation, advancement in the productive forces, ephemeralization, doing more and more with less and less, that would have allowed the Soviet Union to have even better living standards and eventually get on par with the United States by the 1980s, as originally predicted by Khrushchev. It was a very optimistic goal, but it probably could have been done had they gone down that route. Unfortunately, they went a different direction and they refused to reduce work hours. And there are a number of reasons why that is, and we are going to discuss them in the article that I found for your review, our review. How labor hour reduction brought about the collapse of the Soviet Union. Part of my heavy use of direct quotes. All right. What led to what Bronston calls the tacit abandonment of the Soviet commitment to providing for a continuously shorter workday and work week, and ultimately to a fully developed communist society, and how might this tacit abandonment have contributed to the collapse of the Soviet mode of production? In his essay, Lessons from the Demise of State Socialism in the Soviet Union and China, the writer David Katz argues that the Soviet Union did not in fact collapse. It was dismantled by a group of persons committed to creating a capitalist society in its place. Quote, "We show in Katz and Ware the Soviet planned economy did not collapse." Yeah, despite some disruptions from economic reform legislation that took effect in 1988, real output and real aggregate consumption grew continuously from 85 through the first half of 1990. The record shows that the Soviet planned economy did not collapse. It was dismantled through political means as power shifted from Gorbachev to Yeltsin and the pro-capitalist coalition. If only a certain somebody didn't open up the political process so that right-wingers could form their own organs of counter-revolution and political organization. If only a certain entity, a certain man sponsored by Coca-Cola and pizza did such a thing. Such a tragedy. The argument by Katz rests on the assumption that the reforms of '88 were not themselves an expression of the collapse. But is this true? I want to suggest that the collapse of the Soviet Union began long before in '89 and '91. The collapse of the Soviet Union began with the tacit abandonment by the Soviets to continually shorten labor time and fully develop a communist society. The collapse of the Soviet Union began, in other words, long before the attempts to reform the economic mechanism. It began in the 60s with the decisions by the Soviets to forego reduction of hours and labor in favor of maximizing output. First, I want to challenge Mr. Katz's timeline on this subject. The crisis appears to not begin in the 80s, as Katz and Ware suggest. It actually looks like it, according to the CIA, the Soviet Union embarked on a bold and unprecedented effort to create a communist society within the foreseeable future. In November 1958, Khrushchev presented these on the 1959 to 1965 economic plan of the Central Committee of the Communist Party. He boasted of past economic progress and said that in the coming period, the period of large-scale building of a communist society, the main tasks would be the creation of material technical basis of communism, the further strengthening of economic and defensive might of the USSR, and simultaneously, the fuller satisfaction of the growing material and spiritual requirements of the Soviet people. According to the CIA, the initial reduction of hours of labor seemed to have had a significant and positive impact on the rate of growth. Reduction of the work week during 1956 to 1960 has contributed to the solution of several important problems facing Soviet leadership in the recent years, including the need to reestablish control over wages, to improve economic efficiency, and to adjust to a tightening urban labor market. By means of the program, levels of living have been raised through increased leisure, and the resistance of formerly experienced upward adjustments in worker norms have been quieted. Soviet managers have been forced to make beneficial but formerly neglected changes in methods of operation, thereby sharply raising efficiency in the non-agricultural sector with a minimum amount of new investments. Finally, the shorter work week, together with the higher hourly pay, has helped to relieve the pinch of the tightening urban labor market by providing a particular inducement for housewives and young people to seek employment. And this is from the CIA. The CIA are saying this, evaluating the Soviet economic program. And I do have a little commentary here. It's very interesting how they didn't pursue this policy throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I mean, this is like the most obvious path to communism. And the answer is that a lot of like the managers, like the mid-managers, got in the way of it. There was a division between the mid-managers and higher level planners. And these mid-managers basically saw this automation as threatening their administrative like positions of authority, which is one of the reasons why they fought against it. So anyways, according to an economist working for the CIA, however, the economic growth in the Soviet Union began to slow, owing initially to a series of unforeseen economic shocks. A little more than 3 years after the Dole's testimony, a major CIA paper, Trends in the Soviet Economy, recognized the fall-off of the rates of growth in industry and agriculture. In particular, agriculture had been hit by a series of poor and indifferent harvests. As a result of an acceleration in defensive spending, resources were overcommitted and the consumers suffered, which is true. The Soviets were committing heavily to the arms race with the West, and they ended up having to divert a lot of resources that they could be spending back at home towards that. There's also other factors as well, such as reaching the limits of extensive growth, which means total aggregate economic outputs. Whenever you look at the economic growth and developments of a country pre and post industrialization, you'll find that when a country industrializes, that extensive growth tends to go down, which means like total outputs of just raw materials and heavy industry. And in order to continue to grow the economy, you need to focus on intensive economic growth. In other words, taking the outputs that you have and getting the most that you can out of as little resources as possible. So diversification of light industry and so on. This is something the Soviets did not do very well in, partly because of their fundamental inability to plan for all the variety of consumer goods that were coming their way. One moment. Someone's giving me a phone call. But anyways, yeah, a lot of it came down to the limits of technology at the time. They were like implementing cybernetics as early as like the 1960s. But the reason why they didn't go like full Salvador Allende with it, where they just had like a fully cybernetically planned economy, is because there were a lot of old methods of economic planning that were in place that were like tried, tested, and true. And a lot of planners were weary about implementing these new experimental methods. They did slowly get implemented over time, and they even had like a fully functioning cybernetic system in place by the mid 1980s. But by that point, I don't know. Anyways, in 1962, meat prices were raised by 30%, scheduled reductions in personal income taxes were deferred to restrain consumer demand, and housing construction was cut. The paper questioned whether the Soviet leadership would countenance an inclusive military buildup for a very long, given the fundamental long-term Soviet policy of overtaking the United States economically. Furthermore, consumers were becoming more insistent on having better quality food, decent housing, and more consumer durables. Finally, Soviet leadership were increasingly aware that the arms and space races were hurting economic growth much more than the USSR than in the United States. Yeah, as it turns out, when you don't have like a massive pool of imperialist surplus value to draw from to finance a massive overbloated military, it tends to hurt your economy. But anyways, let's read a little more. It is important to note that this tacit abandonment is not a response to the initial reduction of hours of labor, which, according to the CIA's own analysis, raised the standards of living of Soviet citizens, increased output, forced beneficial changes in the methods of production, improved the efficiency of employment of labor, and increased participation in the labor force. On the other hand, short-lived shocks like poor harvests are an insufficient cause to explain the forces that ultimately led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. To explain that event, we probably need to link these short-lived shocks to the actual defects of the Soviet model. As Kotz explains, the Soviet model had contradictory characteristics. Although a form of social production based on public ownership of the means of production, society was dominated by a relatively small clique of individuals who enjoyed a lifestyle uncharacteristic of that of the majority of the working class. Ah, yes. The old stereotype of the wealthy bureaucrats. The Soviet state was run by a privileged group of officials who not only received high money incomes, but also had substandard prerequisites that included special stores stocked with high-quality goods made in special enterprises, and lacking the long lines found in ordinary stores, homes built by special construction enterprises, and so on. Whether or not one can consider this group to be a surplus appropriating ruling class, they clearly were a privileged ruling group that would have no place in a fully socialist system. However, no matter how contrary to communist management, this privileged group was essential to the Soviet top-down development model. While socialism requires economic planning, the Soviet system utilized an extremely centralized form of planning in which the attempt was made to direct in a very detailed way the entire Soviet economy from the center of Moscow. This left enterprises with a little role to play but that of carrying out orders from above. Within enterprises, the general director was an absolute authority and worker relations were strictly hierarchical. This feature was the only important one that bears a strong resemblance to the relevant capitalist institution. Although substantive power relations were different in certain respects, Soviet workers lacked unions that sought to actively defend their rights, but as was noted above, full employment gave the workers significant informal bargaining power, both individually and collectively. So, I do want to come to a close on this article, but anyways, there's a little bit that we can take away from this. Quite a bit that we can take away from this. I think one thing that we can take away, and this is something that I think our anarchist comrades kind of have a point on, which I do kind of agree with them on, is that the Soviet Union was way too centralized from the top down. Planning was too centralized. And I do think that more decentral planning would have helped in the long run. And they did. They did decentralize planning down the line. They gave more autonomy to individual enterprises to do their own economic planning with the Kazygin reforms of 1965. And they also shifted more priority towards light industry. So these things were being done. But still, there was a divide between like the higher level planners and mid managers. And a lot of these managers pretty much coveted their positions, and the increased automation would have threatened their positions and like their authority and their privilege, which is the reason why there was like a disincentive, and they were almost like a pseudo class in the sense. And the same could be said for like a lot of the bureaucrats. Like I said, none of them can really be called like a full on class from from like a Marxian perspective, but there were definitely conflicts of interests between different groups in Soviet society. So the answer is you don't have a gerontocracy. You have term limits. You rotate these positions of authority, and you make sure to derive people directly from the working class for a lot of these positions of power and authority, rather than having a system of favoritism and privilege where only blue-collar workers and political elites and the intelligentsia are in charge. Also, you deliberately push towards automation, shortening work weeks, reducing labor time while increasing pay. This is something that we should be pushing for now in our movement, and this is something we should be pushing for within the context of a socialist planned economy, because there's literally no reason why, with the advanced technology we have today, that, I, some random schmuck, should be working 60 hours a week, in a warehouse. Anyways, let's go ahead and move on. Moving on. Is the neocon Trotskyite connection? I mean, the pipeline is real. It is an actual pipeline. And it was pretty predominant in the 70s because Trotskyists had a propensity to align, like American Trotskyists anyways, had a propensity to align with U.S. Foreign interests in terms of like overthrowing and like fighting like the spread of communism, because they were just seen as degenerate worker states. So, which is true historically. I'm not saying it's true of all Trotskyists. I mean, there's Marxists who pretty much back any country that waves a red flag. From a managerial standpoint, it's called the command economy. This can work so long as the person's giving commands has an idea of what he's doing. Oh yes, which is true. The command economy also allowed for corruption in the case of commissars who purposely lied to their supervisors. I mean, the question of corruption and how you're going to deal with it, there's a long conversation we can have about that. I personally don't believe there should really be any extra wealth or merit that should come with being in a position of power or authority. It's just a job, In the same manner that being a scientist is a job or being a construction worker is a job, it's just something that you do. It's a duty that you fulfill, and there's like no extra pay that comes with it unless it's like in demand. But anyways, yeah, so that's basically one idea of what could have saved the Soviet Union is if they continued to go down that path. But unfortunately, I do believe the Maoists have a point when they say that it was revisionist. But I wouldn't say they were full on a capitalist country in the 1960s. Revisionist, sure. You can argue that they were on the path to capitalism as early as the 1960s, but you can't say that capitalism was truly restored. It was the real capitalist restoration did not occur in the USSR until 1987 under Gorbachev, with the, I believe, perestroika reforms that were ushered in, which basically brought back private property and markets. But anyways, let's go ahead and move on. So this is a clip I watched from Secular Talk. Basically, it's a video of Joe Biden. Let's finish this Corona stream off with a little anti-Biden plug. Yeah, let's do this. All right, cool. Let's see how champion of civil rights, far lefty Comrade Biden reacts to this meeting with all these civil rights activists and leaders. Let's check this out.
Progress they thought they would have seen at this point. Let's not disappoint them, and let's not get to a place where voters in Georgia begin to second guess.
Okay, let me respond. I gotta go. Let me respond. There's a lot to respond to here. Let's get something straight. You shouldn't be disappointed. What I've done so far is more than anybody else has done this far. Okay? Number one. Number two, I mean what I say when I say it. I mean what I say when I say it. I'm the only person who's ever run on 3 platforms that I was told could not possibly win the election. And I never ceased from it. One was on restoring the soul of this country because of what I saw happen in Charlottesville. That was it. No one else was talking about it. The words of presidents matter. Nope.
A lot of people were talking about Charlottesville. I don't know what you were talking about. The mainstream media was all over that like flies on hot poop. And what is it about your campaign, Biden? What specifically, what has Biden promised to do for Black people? What is it over the course of Joe Biden's campaign that, by default makes him better for Black people than Donald Trump? Like, really? This pro-segregationist crime bill, war backing piece of shit? Like, what exactly has he done for the Black community besides, hurt them and fuck them over nonstop,
Nobody else, no progressive, was talking about it. I did. My son voiced that expression. He said, remember, Dad, home base. It ain't worth the job if I can't say what I believe. I didn't want to run this time. I ran this time because of the racist son of a gun who was president of the United States of America.
Oh my God, you are so dishonest. You are so fucking dishonest, dude. I can't stand U.S. politics. I just can't stand it because it's like a default for people to be corrupt, cynical, dishonest, lying, greedy, backstabbing pieces of shit. And that's exactly what I see when I see Joe Biden. It's just so unbelievably ridiculous how anyone could back this system. Why do people fall behind the Democrats again? Really? What's the argument again for why we should fall in line and support the Democrats? What? I just don't see any good reason to do it. I don't see entryism as helping our cause at all, So I don't get the strategy here. Listen to what Joe Biden is saying.
That's why I ran. And you remember, a lot of you told me talking about the soul of America was going over people's heads. They didn't know what we were talking about. So
guys, racism's bad. All right. Did you guys know that racism's bad? So Joe Biden must be, really good for Black people because he's saying racism's bad, right?
Words of a president matter. What a president says matters. And you've never seen me shy.
What a president does also matters. And your tough on crime legislation and your pro-segregationist record all demonstrate that you're fucking abysmal.
In the middle of the debate, I called him a racist. In the middle of the debate with him, I took on white supremacists. I'm the guy that took on every single time somebody was threatened in this country. The only white boy you know who did it, period, out there, every single time. So look, all I'm saying here is, guys and ladies, we're on the same exact page.
Yeah, whatever. He's just saying this, being like, I fought for your rights. Now shut up. I said racism was wrong. You voted for me to say that racism was wrong. And I did it. I said on live television that racism was wrong. Now fall in line and shut up, darky. That's all I hear when I'm listening to this bullshit. And he's right to be called on it. Good old Joe Biden. It's just absolutely absurd to me. You guys have heard me say this over and over again. People just need to support third parties, participate in third parties, and be active in their local communities. But that's really it. I've said this over and over again, and I just feel like I'm repeating myself ad nauseum. But you're not gonna liberate anybody by choosing which people in an oppressive system are oppressing you. Calling himself a white, yeah, I know, right? Both parties are tasked with increasing exploitation and misery. Trump wants to increase it a bit more at home. Biden wants to export it a bit more to poor communities. Main difference. Yeah, I don't really see any meaningful differences. I see Biden bringing back some Obama-era policies, but right now, as it stands, the Senate is packed with more Republicans than when we started, The House is still packed full of Republicans. Trump says he's going to run again. They're talking about busting out the austerity. Biden's filled his cabinets full of technocrats and like neoliberal oligarchs. So I really don't see. I don't see really any fundamental changes, And I know some Biden shills are going to be like, oh, but nothing fundamentally changing is better than things getting fundamentally worse, right? And I'm like, yeah, no, they're going to get fundamentally worse no matter who's in power. I mean, I really don't see the difference between these two. People, vote your conscience, support parties that actually represent your interests. But anyways, moving on. Let's California. Here, I've got one last story for you guys. California officials order 5,000 body bags as state's intensive care units near full capacity. On Tuesday, California Governor Gavin. Oh, wait, right. I forgot to share the screen. My bad. Across California, a public health catastrophe is now unfolding, with coronavirus infections growing exponentially. On Wednesday, the California Department of Public Health reported over 61,000 new daily cases and 407 deaths. Oh, damn. Oh, yeah, no. California is being ravaged. The average number of daily cases in California has more than quadrupled over the last month, while the number of hospitalizations has more than tripled. With the virus spreading unchecked, hospitalizations will likely double again over the next month, putting unprecedented pressure on the entire healthcare system. More than 12,000 COVID-19 patients are hospitalized statewide, and hospital intensive care units are nearing capacity. As December 16, only about 4.1% of the state's ICU beds were currently available. Even before the pandemic, ICU beds were typically run just above demands to minimize costs, with hospitals routinely shuffling patients between ICUs and other hospital wards as needed. With about 2.1 ICU beds per 10,000 inhabitants, California was among the least prepared states of the nation to respond to the dramatic increase in the number of critical ill patients brought on by the pandemic. I don't know. So yeah, no, healthcare system. I don't really feel like going through this article. I had a couple other articles lined up, but I think I'm just about done. I don't really feel like repeating myself anymore. I do want to rein things back a little bit and talk about the dynamic between the Republicans and the Democrats a little bit. And this is a dynamic that I've picked up on. So on one hand, you have the Republicans who represent like the strong arm, like more like iron grip authority sect of the capitalist class. Typically, they'll run like a strongman, like a faux straight shooter, faux populist strongman who's a terrible public speaker but has a good sense of humor, who's usually like an entertainer before they get into politics. You see this with Ronald Reagan, you see this with George Bush and Donald Trump. But the point is, the Republicans, they're the strong arm wing. And then you've got the Democrats, who, on the other hand, their job is to basically pay lip service to working class politics, pay lip service to wanting to stick up for the little guy. They're basically the good cops, like, oh, support us against the Republicans who are going to impose austerity and, be mean to minorities and such. But the issue is that the Democrats frame themselves and portray themselves in a way to where they always, they're weak. Like, oh, well, we got to compromise. We got to work with the Republicans. We can't just fight them. We can't just fight for your rights. We have to work with the Republicans. We have to collaborate with them. And if the Republican Party is like the most reactionary sects of the capitalist class, or representatives of the capitalist class anyways. They're the most reactionary components of capital in power. You could very much call them a crypto-fascistic party, if not an outright fascist party. And if the Democrats are talking about collaborating with them and working with them, as Biden is, he's already talking about working with them on austerity measures and that there's not going to be a lockdown. We're talking about bringing the country together, bipartisan participation to fuck you over. So, if they're talking about doing this, doesn't this effectively make the Democrats fascist collaborators? Like, fundamentally, does this not make them fascist collaborators if they're working with these people that are constantly trying to aggressively cut the public sector and deregulate at all times? Like, I mean, fundamentally, I'm just saying. And then you also got to consider how this is how the Democrats prop the Republicans up, all right? And this is how the Republicans, in a sense, prop the Democrats up, because they're the evil boogeymen. So the two-party system, both parties kind of lean on one another and prop each other up very, very well and efficiently, mind you. So on one hand, you have the Republicans with their Donald Trump, with their fascist strongman boogeyman, and then you have the Democrats on the other side, and their main tactic is that they are not the fascist strongman boogeyman. So basically, what you have here is a dynamic where the Democrats inadvertently enable the Republicans because they never run candidates that are in touch with the working class. They never run candidates that are basically that don't just spout cliches and platitudes. They never run candidates that people can relate to. The Republicans do. They run the strong, authoritative, charismatic figure that is domineering in persona and character. And people, when their lives are miserable and they don't know what's going on, they have this person telling you that they're going to fix your problems and this and this is your problem. And then you have the Democrats, on the other hand, that are always working to compromise and bend over backwards and aren't really like standing for anything. The Republicans stand for fascism while the Democrats stand for nothing. And your general average person who isn't really interested in politics is a lot more likely to support someone who seems to stand for something and have principles, no matter how god-awful and evil those principles might be, over a candidate that's only selling point is they're not that person who's standing for those principles. We don't really stand for anything, but we're only nominally to the left of that other guy. It's really an ingenious system that they got going here, because this is how they club us over the head and tell the lefties that they need to fall in line to stop this greater evil threat. You know, don't form your own third party. Don't form your own coalitions. Don't do this and that. Don't actually do like class struggle. Just fall in line and support the Democrats. It's really brilliant how the Democrats, as well as Democratic partisan shills, work to rein in revolutionary fervor within the hegemony of the Democratic Party, a hegemony that will never, ever be challenged, that will never, ever be challenged whatsoever. So you're going to get your Nina Turners and your Bernie Sanders and your AOCs that are never going to threaten to break off from the Democrats, that are never going to threaten to fight against the Democrats when they actively stand in line and support fascists and collaborating with fascists. So you just end up in a situation like this right now, where you have Bernie Sanders, who sold out his own political movement to the Biden administration. But imagine if we were in a different situation. Imagine if we were in a situation where Bernie did break away. If he did say the system's rigged, it's corrupt, it's unsalvageable, and I'm going to get behind the Green parties. Imagine if he took his hundreds of millions in small donations, contributions, and funneled that into the Green Party, as well as his campaign infrastructure that had been built up. Now, wouldn't that be something? Imagine if he continued to go beyond the Democrats and he went on to build new mutual aid networks, sponsor unions, and use his financial power to build organs of dual power and workers' control. Now, imagine if that was done. Imagine if he used these new dual power institutions to work with, say, a third party, a working class party, to build up an institution that was capable of challenging the hegemony of the Republicans and the Democrats. Imagine that. Now, wouldn't that be something? These are the things that Bernie Sanders would be doing if he wasn't a total fucking sellout. If he was actually interested in building a political campaign, a political revolution, like he says. But no, instead, he decided to be a pussy, to be a coward, to be a Democratic partisan shill for the sake of securing his political career. And that's all it came down to with him. He didn't want to be nadered. He didn't want to be rejected. What matters more to Bernie Sanders is being a Democratic partisan shill and being friends with the Democrats than the toiling and suffering lives of the American proletarian masses. So, and it is in that way that Bernie Sanders is counter-revolutionary and deserves the wall just like the rest of them. That Republicans, Democrats deserve just straight. They go straight to the wall post-revolution. Anyways, so long story short, I have very, very little faith in the political process's ability to reform. I have like virtually no faith because people don't understand that the reforms that came during like the era of militant labor. Well, yeah, that's when they came. We're in the era of militant labor where people were organized into these unions. They were organized in these trade unions, and they were at times, sometimes engaging in outright armed struggle against the government. People were shot, people were killed. Look at like the labor wars of, was it Kentucky or Virginia? You had like tens of thousands of coal miners that took up arms against the government. And you had like a Civil War type scenario where it was like union busters and like the U.S. military against coal miners. A lot of these reforms came within a context when there was a lot more out of the bourgeois parliamentarism and in the territory of third parties and parallel dual power institutions, people organizing outside of the context of bourgeois parliamentarism and politics, people organized on their own terms. In other words, we're not organized on our own terms. We're nowhere near that level of organization right now. And we're really going to think that we can push the Democrats to actually push for these reforms when, popular reform only came when the alternative was revolution. Like, really, do you really think we're going to be able to usher in those reforms and we're really going to make those fundamental changes within that context when we have absolutely no leverage politically or militarily to change things? Now, if you're going to try to like push the Democrats left, you could do that if you, once again, outside the context of the Democrats, rather than just using entryism as a strategy, use militant working class organizing and iron discipline and so on. But no one wants to do this. A lot of people are too enamored by the Democrats, and they are too mired by the legitimacy of bourgeois parliamentarism. They're too entrenched in it. It's too entrenched in the psyche of Americans. Now, this is slowly starting to change, and I'm seeing a lot of this on like the big progressive channels like the Jimmy Dore and Secular Talk. People demonstrating a lot of contempt for the Democrats, but they still run to them. Like battered housewives, like abused housewives, they're still running to the Democrats. And I don't understand why Dore or Kulinski aren't advocating for the kind of stuff that I'm advocating for. You really want change? You really want power? You don't go to the people that are oppressing you and ask them to treat you with equality. You take your power, all right? And they're not advocating that people go and take their power. They're advocating that people fucking get on their knees and ask politely for their power, all right? It's really fucking stupid, and it makes me sick, and it's gross, and it's cringe, and it's dumb. And yeah. Before we close this Corona stream, there's one last thing that I want to talk about while we're on the topic of parliamentarism and electoralism. Okay, so what do you guys know of radical liberalism, or radlibery, or what radlibs are? Type down in the comments below if you know what a radlib is. If you don't know what a radlib is, that is okay, because I can explain to you what a radlib is. I have a scientific socialist definition, a Marxist definition of what a radlib is. I can tell you exactly what a radlib, radlib, what a radlib is. All right. But anyways, facts. Okay. So here's what a radlib is. A radlib is basically, yeah, like a Bernstein or a Kautsky. Yeah, revisionists. All right. So a radlib is basically someone who says they're in favor of socialism, who says that they're in favor of workers' control, democratic participatory control of the means of production. They say they're in favor of those things, but their strategies and their rhetoric and a lot of the things that they're in favor of ultimately align them more heavily with the liberal establishments than it does socialist revolution. In other words, these are people that favor reform and participating and fornicating with the bourgeois state over outright overthrowing it, basically. And there are many radlibs on YouTube, from let's see, ContraPoint to COINTELPRO-operative Kaczynski, Xander Hall. These are just some examples of them. And they're fundamentally people that don't read theory, that aren't really familiar with revolutionary theory, that don't really advocate or participate in any sort of large-scale organizing. In other words, they're socialist in word, but they're liberal in deeds. That is what a radlib is. And remember that. Socialist in words, liberal in deeds. Because when you look at the way they behave and the way they treat other leftists, all you got to do is look at the way they treat people who are of a revolutionary mindset. You know, treating them like, oh, well, what you want is unrealistic. Oh, that's just not unfathomable within the scope of what's achievable. You have to participate in the legitimate organs of bourgeois control in order to usher in any real meaningful change. Just have faith in the process, in other words. Have faith in the process. Have faith in the right-wing capitalist government to grant you concessions. You know, don't have faith in the Communist Party that's going to run representatives that are going to participate within that government and actually fight against the other politicians to grant you those concessions. Don't, join a union. Don't join the DSA. Don't join any of these, these small, decentralized, ineffective, impotent leftist orgs. No, just support the Democrats. Support Bernie Sanders, Because Bernie Sanders is the one who awakened all that class consciousness, am I right? And when I look at Bernie Sanders, I just look at Occupy Wall Street, a movement that spontaneously flared up in response to the mass inequality, alienation, and destructiveness of our system. They're flaring up in response to it, but they don't have any revolutionary theory. They don't have the militant mindset that it needs to really change things. So you have these spontaneous flare-ups that end up amounting to jack shit. Like, what has Bernie Sanders really done for us, for example? What did the Occupy Wall Street movement really achieve in the long run? Are we really a revolutionary movement about changing things, or is it all about optics? Is it really just about appearing like you're revolutionary, appearing like you want to change things, appearing like you're a radical, when really you're about as bougie as the next kid up the block, I'm just wondering, So now that we know what a radlib is, what do we do about people like this? All right. There's a reason why the biggest YouTubers are, like, the biggest left-wing YouTubers are radlibs, because their message can be commodified. It can generate ad revenue. It can, it can be claims by capitalism. Anti-capitalism as a symbol commodified to people that have anti-capitalist sentiments. but ultimately don't challenge the capitalist system in any meaningful way. So that's the reason why these channels get so big and why the algorithm favors them, while actual revolutionaries tend to get suppressed by the algorithm. As it turns out, when you actually stand against the status quo and you're a radical, you tend to get censored. I mean, happened in Lenin's day, and it's happening in our day. So, I mean, it is what it is. Being a radical is you're going to be pushed to the very niche corners of the internet. But anyways, and that's what I'm trying to say. These people are a byproduct of the desire for something new being commodified. In other words, that's really all it comes down to. So, I mean, what are we to do about it? The answer is, I mean, we create our own channels, of course, and we utilize the fact that they exist, because I do think that these people are useful to an extent, because they at the very least bring people to the conclusion that capitalism's bad, but they're ultimately anti-communists in the end, which is a serious fucking problem. So what we need to do is basically generate our own sphere of YouTube that is actually pro-communist, so that we can actually have effective propaganda campaigns. Like the internet is a wonderful fucking tool. Like I think it's a glorious tool. In fact, I think the internet may be the key to changing things around here, because that way we can use the internet to organize, to coordinate things, to stay in touch with one another, to be connected in ways that we never could be before. And that's ultimately what leads to us winning in the end, is when we're connected with one another and we realize our collective class interest. So I think we have that going for us. And another thing is, I think that what we really need to do is just have our propaganda apparatuses. What we need are people with charisma, because something I've noticed is that a lot of people that go down the path of Marxism-Leninism or become Maoists are generally the most disenfranchised and the most alienated people by society at large, and they get pushed into these niches and corners, and a lot of them are just not really neurotypical people that are super like charismatic or sharp. And I definitely think this is a bit of a problem. So we need people who are going to be charismatic and be the face of the movement. And one thing that we also need is we definitely need to make this more intersectional, because one thing I have noticed, like S4A made a video about this, how there aren't enough women involved. We definitely need to start bringing more women into the sphere and pull more women out of the rad-lib bubble. I mean, women hold up half the sky, guys. And if we make this a nice 50-50 compensation, think about it, that doubles our subscribers. That doubles the number of eyes on us. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. The reason, one of the main reasons why this is like I said, social democracy and anarchism, a lot of it comes down to the individualistic mindset, like the very petty bourgeois nature of these other left-wing tendencies. They lack discipline, they're utopian, it's like a lot of it's just idealistic. You've got soc dems who don't realize capitalism's a zero-sum game. You have anarchists who think that you can create socialism without a state. You can have like rule of the workers and everyone's just going to want to participate, and you won't need like armed bodies of men to protect and surround the revolution. Just people can do it on their own. When the truth is that most people aren't really interested in politics. This has always been the case, and this may sound elitist, but realistically, most people are not interested in politics or being leaders. Most people are just interested in working, living their lives, taking care of themselves and their families, and just having a good time. Most people are not interested in actually being leaders. So for the people that want to work, let them work. For the people that want to fight, let them fight. And for the people that want to be leaders, like the world's a stage and we're all merely players. And I think we need to acknowledge and recognize that, some people are just meant to lead, and some people, just let them. The goal is to find people that are actually committed to leadership and, filtering out the cynical opportunists that, would come along and try and take advantage of it. So really the goal is not power. The issue isn't power, it's holding power accountable. And that's the real problem with the state. I find the total refusal to talk really turns the self-centeredness against them. Wait, who? Oh, I mean, we should still talk to people. Let's see. I'm 90% sure these channels are a psyop. I don't think they're a psyop. I just think they're much more easy to commodify, and they're easy to put advertisements on. That's really all it comes down to, because they don't really challenge power or fundamentally challenge the system in the way that it needs to be challenged. Yeah, no, don't abandon dialogue with right-wingers. You should still try to save them from the darkness of reaction. And we need a movement that appeals to everyone, that can bring as many people into the fray as possible. A movement where it is within the material interests of people to participate and be a part of. That's really it. We need to build Soviet communities with our own unions and our own factories and police and our own country inside of our country. And when the bourgeoisie attacks us, we defend ourselves. Which is true. This definitely needs to be done. You're seeing this done in India. You're seeing this done in the third world. You don't really see this kind of behavior in the United States. People are still way too individualistic to participate and do this sort of stuff, and it's kind of sad. Oh yeah, no, I wanted to talk about my third worldism video, and we will get to that in a moment, because that reminded me. Oh yeah, no, it's true. Yeah, no, it's true. People just want to grill, you know? A lot of people just want to grill. We also need to make sure that the socialist leaders are willing to give up their power when it... Oh, yeah, true. This is why I'm in favor of sortition democracy and term limits. That way you don't end up with a fucking gerontocracy where the same old motherfuckers have been in charge for the last 45 years. I think the longest that people should be in charge for I think a good limit is like 15 to 20 years. I think after you've been in a position of power for 20 years, that's it. You can't rule for any longer. Bring some new blood into the fray. Give someone else a chance. That's what I say. Oh yeah, so let's go ahead and rein things in a bit. I guess I'll close by talking about my critique of third worldism. So there's a reason why I made that video, and this is a little bit of a psyop on my end. The real reason why I made my critique of third worldism is not because I hope to refute Jason and I want to slam dunk on him, lay epic style with facts and logic. The reason why I made that video was because I want him to destroy me with facts and logic. I want him to refute my points. I want him to address my criticisms, because I'm halfway sold on third worldism. But if he's able to make a response that completely crushes it, then I'm sold. I'm on board with it 100%. That's the real reason why I made that video, is because I want to be 100% sold. I want a case that's bulletproof. That's why I went out of my way to steelman third worldism, and that's why I put up my best arguments against him, is because I want him to convince me. I want him to convince me. I want him to sell me on it, basically. And if he can address the stuff that he has to say, if people can bring up criticisms, then yeah, no. Because I'm already halfway on board with third worldism, but if he can crush it, and I kind of hope he does, I will become third worldist. So I probably won't call myself a third worldist, but I'll uphold third worldism at the very least. I actually believe that leftists should infiltrate the governments, but not by voting for bourgeois candidates. Yeah. I mean, it'd probably be a little bit easier to infiltrate the Democrats, but the problem with that is that the Democratic Party basically makes you swear an oath that you're married to the Democrats. You can't really participate in any other parties. You're part of the Democrats, and if you go and you fornicate with other parties, then they're just going to purge you. Like, they're just going to kick you out. That's the issue, is it's very, very difficult to just infiltrate the Democrats. This is the entry-as strategy that I'm talking about, and that's the main thing that I'm arguing against. Is I've been waiting I've been seeing the strategy at play and it doesn't work, which is why I've been speaking against it and why we need to organize outside of the context of the bourgeois state and form a third party altogether. Now, I've heard people say that because of the winner-take-all nature of our elections, just for getting a plurality of the vote, the forces of reaction can win. Well, I don't really think we should run. We should run presidential candidates for propaganda purposes, but I'm more about running people for local office. Like, who's going to have more impact directly in your local community, the presidents or the mayor of your town, you know? So try to have a third party and try to run some leftist mayors, try to run some leftist senators and governors in your local state. I feel like that would be a lot more viable than just trying to take over the Democratic Party, because the Democrats are, they're gone. They're a lost cause, honestly. Thoughts on AOC and the push for Medicare for all? AOC's a careerist. I think she means well. But when you participate in that apparatus, when you're part of that machine, you know, and you play the game in the machine, you play by the same rules. Are you really changing the machine, or is the machine changing you? I've seen her vote for Pelosi. I've seen her, you know, as speaker for the House. I've seen her vote in favor of increasing the defense budget. And I've seen her do and say things that are in the pursuit of her own cynical careerist choices. So really, she's a career politician. Despite her intentions, the path to hell is paved on good intentions. I'm sure. You know, well, what's a good example? I mean, Thanos had good intentions. He wanted to stop overpopulation, bro. I mean, it is what it is. That's why I say eschew the Democrats, uphold a third party. So, let's see. Do you think the Bolsheviks or any other revolutionaries, that party that succeeded, did never talk with? Yes, they did. They worked with outright right-wing trade unions. I mean, he talks about this in left-wing communism. What's the quote? Isn't it kind of like childish that we aren't going to ever work with like right-wingers or right-wing organizations at all whatsoever? No, you have to be willing to compromise, and you have to be willing to find commonalities with different political groups and organizations and work with them towards common goals. I'm not saying that we collaborate with fascists, but I'm saying if there's like, you know, right-wing parties and there's a you know, a policy they're fighting for that would also help us down the line, like defending Second Amendment rights, then yeah, we should work with them on that. It's kind of an ultra position to like never compromise. That's definitely a very ultra position. Like when a lot of Maoists will attack the PSL because they tolerated some right-wing nationalists coming to one of their anti-war protests, but I mean, it is what it is. Just work with who you can. Just as long as you're not helping fascists, that's really it. Just be willing to compromise on political policy when you need to. She's openly denied Tara Reade's accusation. Oh, yeah, no, exactly. She's a career politician. She's trying to secure that position. On third worldism question, I think material conditions are deteriorating rapidly in the imperial core to the point that places like Italy and Greece probably no longer qualify. Okay, so here's the thing. I do think material conditions are deteriorating rapidly in the imperial core because they have to, because capitalism is a zero-sum game, and they inevitably have to come back home to increase the rates of exploitation, as they are doing now. And on the other hand, you have the productive forces being developed within the third world. So, you know, economic growth and industrial developments occurring in the third world. So I think the lines between first and third world over time are going to start to kind of get blurred. And the whole world's going to kind of even out to be this like global, equal connected final stage capitalist situation where most of the population is working poor, and only a minority of the population can afford the goods and services that the capitalists are trying to peddle, say the top 5 to 10% of earners. Anyways, so I think I'm going to go ahead and bring things to a close. Let's go ahead and bring this to a Clint, but thoughts on Tiananmen? I mean, I don't really have any thoughts on Tiananmen. It was just a bunch of protests. It was a bunch of protests started by Maoists, hijacked by a bunch of liberals, and Deng panicked and he sent in the tanks. There was definitely a massacre. People definitely died. There are like pictures of people who've been injured and killed at the Tiananmen Square protests. But like, I mean, there were massive crackdowns. I'm not saying it's unique to China. Like, there are massive crackdowns in the United States. I'm neutral on it. I don't think there's any CIA conspiracy behind it. I think it just happened. I mean, I don't know. I've seen many places in the USA where the economy is borderline third world and people treat each other like garbage. Okay, so there is this place in the United States called Odd. It's a town. I think it's in West Virginia. Yeah, Odd, West Virginia. So this town, if we're going to talk third world, in the United States, there are pockets of third world living conditions in America. And one of them is in Odd, West Virginia. Like, when you look at the towns and like the area, like here, this is like the famous inbred family from Odd, West Virginia. I actually used to live in West Virginia, and there were actually pockets like where I was walking around and about where there's like people outside, like I believe it was New Martinsville. In New Martinsville, you had like unemployment as high as 20% in a population of like 3,000. Everyone pretty much lived on food stamps and welfare. A bunch of old people, and every single, the first of the month, they would all swarm the only institution there, Walmart, and the gas stations where everyone would stock up on food. People were just popping painkillers left and right. The economy was just trash because like all the industry left. So New Martinsville was just one of those towns that was left in the dirt during the 90s by neoliberalism. I moved out of New Martinsville 7 years ago, and I've been living back in Ohio ever since. But yeah, no, there are pockets like Native American reservations. There are parts of downtown where I live where it just looks like absolute dog shit. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like capitalism's ugly as shit, dude. Like, even when you go to the nicer places, it's just not ugly. Like, the infrastructure is all gray and just dull and uncreative. It's just not really like fun. And and it's kind of funny because when you go to these towns and you try to talk about socialism with people, or when you go to any like really deprived areas, I've noticed this more specifically in like the white trash areas. I mean, some people are receptive. Like the younger people, it's interesting. Younger people are receptive to socialism and its rhetoric, but if you talk to any of, like really anyone over the age of 30, 35, suddenly they're hardline anti-communists and they're super, super like against it. But if you talk to like people that are young enough, that's where you got to get them. You got to get the youth, all right? The youth are all about it, but everyone over the age of 30 in America has been brainwashed to be an anti-communist. So unfortunately, they're kind of a wash. But you can get to young people, and young people, because they grew up in the shit that is the neoliberal era, so they'll be a lot more receptive to it, and they aren't going to be brainwashed by decades of Red Scare, Cold War nonsense. My relative is a psychologist in the South Dakota Native American reservation. The kids go to the entire weekend without eating. Yeah, so exactly. I'm going to Google that, actually. Here we go. All right, let's look that up. All right, pull that up on screen, Jamie. I mean, we don't really have a lot of pictures. I mean, there's some pictures here. Looks like, what the fuck? Aaron Huey photographs Pine Ridge Reservation. There's a lot of clothes here. I just want to see what this reservation looks like. I'm not going to lie, it actually looks pretty nice. It looks pretty out there. It just looks like a suburb. I mean, but anyways. 3 forbidden words of American politics: communism, socialism, fascism. Don't use those words in your political career. Will be fine. Vosh is 20, but he's still an anti-commie. Okay, well, first off, we don't call him that here. We call him COINTELPRO Operative Kaczynski, all right? Agent Kaczynski, he's actually the same age as me. He's 26. But you have to understand his background. He's from an upper middle class background. Like, his parents are from Hollywood. So, I mean, you know that motherfucker's never been hungry. Just look at him, dude. You really think that guy... You really think that guy is a working man? You really think he's working class? No. His background's petty bourgeois, so it makes sense that he's a fucking anti-communist. Like, he's an example of... He's just a radlib. And that's where a lot of American leftists are going to trend towards, is radlibism, because it's the next logical step past anti-capitalism. So, I mean, unfortunately, these are the people we have to work with, so responsibility falls on us to explain things and provide an alternative. Anyways. DMT. Well, that's good old DMT. Anyways, I think I'm out. Talk to you guys later. Red salute, comrades. I've had my fill. I'm probably going to go take a nap.